So, have you ever felt that overwhelming pressure? A major global event unfolds, maybe a new policy gets announced, and boom, suddenly you're expected to have this fully formed, articulate opinion, like right now.
Oh, absolutely. It really feels like the premium on speed has just completely overtaken the premium on, well, thought.
Exactly.
And it's a profound shift, isn't it? In this age of instant information and often, algorithmically fueled outrage, leaders, everyone really, they're expected to weigh in on everything. Right. Geopolitical conflicts, corporate scandals. Instantly. But as our sources are pointing out today, the crucial question isn't just if you respond, but how. Are we offering genuine insight, or are we just adding to the noise?
That's precisely our mission today. We're embarking on a deep dive to explore how individuals and actually entire nations navigate this relentless torrent of change and information overload. And our specific focus will be on India's strategies, its experiences, drawing insights from, ancient philosophical traditions, all the way through to modern economic policies. Trying to understand how it positions itself in what many are calling an unruly world.
And we've got a great range of sources for this, right? Editorials, reports on economics, geopolitics, social issues, all from around mid-September 2025.
Yeah, a really insightful collection.
And one thing that jumps out straight away from these sources is the immediate impact of this rush to judgment. An ill-informed view, or one expressed too early, especially on complex stuff.
Or emotionally charged stuff.
Exactly. It can seriously harm credibility, it can derail policy, shake investor confidence.
Even fracture social cohesion, the sources say.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it, that leaders, and really all of us, have a responsibility to try and understand an issue deeply before, speaking out with conviction.
Okay, so if the speed of information is the challenge, it sounds like we need some serious tools for, disciplined thinking. And maybe surprisingly, our sources point us back towards ancient Indian philosophical traditions.
That's right.
One is Tarkashastra. Can you tell us a bit more about how that's relevant today?
Certainly. Tarkashastra, you could translate it as the science of reasoning, debate, and inquiry. But it isn't really about winning arguments. It's more about the rigorous pursuit of truth. It gives you a structured framework for telling valid knowledge from invalid knowledge, using a hypothetical reasoning that's Tarka to test claims, and engaging in this truth-seeking debate called Vada.
Vada, okay.
And crucially, it emphasizes avoiding fallacies, emotional manipulation, intellectual dishonesty. Imagine applying those principles in, say, a modern boardroom or a policy discussion.
Right. Grounding decisions in logic, not just gut reaction. That framework sounds incredibly useful for cutting through the noise. And there's another related concept, Anekantwad, the Jain doctrine of many-sidedness. I find that one particularly intriguing. How does that sort of expand our perspective on truth?
Well, that's where Anekantwad becomes really vital. It basically says that truth is multifaceted. No single perspective holds a monopoly on it. Yeah. Now, this isn't relativism, like anything goes. It's what our sources are calling strategic humility.
Strategic humility, I like that.
Yeah, it teaches us to hold space for multiple viewpoints, even ones that seem to conflict, recognizing the limits of our own perception. So for decision makers, Anekantwad acts like a crucial filter. Maybe opposing views aren't totally wrong, just incomplete. It pushes you to seek a more holistic understanding.
So Tarkashastra helps us validate what we think we know. And Anekantwad encourages us to consider what we don't know, or what others might see differently. And putting these together, the sources suggest something powerful about strategic silence. Sometimes the best move is just holding back.
Indeed. In really volatile situations, the sources suggest that silence isn't a weakness. It is strategic maturity. It actually takes courage for leaders to say, look, I'm still evaluating this. Let's wait for more clarity.
Instead of just jumping in.
Right. That deliberate, informed pause actually builds long-term credibility. Hasty opinions often oversimplify things, and they rarely lead to better decisions. It's really about disciplined thought over those knee-jerk reactions.
Yeah, that's a powerful shift in perspective. Okay, let's pivot now and look at how India itself is navigating its own arc of transformation domestically, applying some of these principles perhaps, or at least facing similar complexities. India's been on this massive journey, described as moving from post-independence neglect to modernization.
And a striking observation here is just the sheer scale of the urban renewal and the infrastructure development. I mean, look at airports. Operational airports have more than doubled, from 74 back in 2014 to around 160 today.
Wow, that's a huge jump.
It is, and we're seeing over 140 Vande Bharat Express train services, more than 1,300 railway stations being modernized. This isn't just about numbers on a page. It signifies India's strategic shift towards using physical connectivity as a foundation. For domestic economic integration, yes, but also for a more assertive global position. It's a big change from previous decades, where this kind of investment really lagged.
And it's not just transport, is it? The sources highlight how cities are increasingly seen as engines of growth and symbols of pride under Prime Minister Modi. You see big civic projects like the Central Vista redevelopment, the new Parliament building.
That's right.
But this kind of ambition needs more than just concrete and steel, right? It needs a solid human foundation.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the human capital side of things. NTI Aayog, the government think tank, has apparently driven what the sources call a quiet yet formidable revolution here over the last decade.
Okay, like what?
Well, key initiatives include the National Education Policy 2020 shifting focus from rote learning to critical thinking. That ties back to our earlier discussion, actually.
Interesting connection.
And the Skill India mission, which has trained over 1.5 crore, that's 15 million young people. They've also played a big role in healthcare, modeling infection patterns during crises, implementing telemedicine like e-Sanjivani.
So it's really about empowering people with skills and critical thinking and the impact. The sources talk about a focus on evidence-based policy making, fostering an entrepreneurial ecosystem, Startup India, ATL Innovation Mission.
It sounds like a pretty comprehensive approach, trying to build both a skilled workforce and an innovative economy.
Yeah, it does. However, the path to modernization is never completely smooth, is it? There are always speed bumps.
That's a really crucial distinction to make. While there's visible progress, our sources paint a more nuanced picture when you look at industrial growth specifically. There's actually a significant debate going on.
Oh, about what?
It's about a discrepancy between the official National Accounts Statistics (NAS) and data from the Annual Survey of Industries, the ASI.
Okay, how big a discrepancy are we talking?
Well, take manufacturing gross value added, or GVA, a key measure of output. NAS claims an average growth of about 6.2%. ASI data shows only 3.5%.
That's quite a gap.
It is. And for fixed investment, gross fixed capital formation, GFCF, it's even starker. NAS says 4.5% growth, ASI shows barely anything, just 0.3%.
Wait, 0.3%. So one set of numbers suggests factories are investing and expanding, while the other, often seen as more detailed, says there's almost no new investment happening.
Pretty much. And this isn't just, statisticians arguing. It creates real uncertainty for investors, for policymakers, trying to figure out the true health of India's manufacturing sector.
So what are the implications of this statistical ambiguity? What conclusions are being drawn?
Well, it leads some analysts to concerning conclusions like talk of premature deindustrialization or a hollowed-out domestic industrial capacity.
That sounds serious.
It suggests that maybe big initiatives like Make in India or Manipur haven't really sparked the investment revival hoped for. And then you add external pressures, geopolitical shocks like U.S. tariffs, China restricting intermediate goods. It creates what one source calls a double whammy for India's production base.
So it raises questions about whether the economic engine is truly firing on all cylinders, or if maybe some key policies are missing the mark, creating a vulnerability.
Exactly. It's a complex picture.
Okay, let's maybe delve into some specific policy dilemmas India is grappling with, starting with something called cesses. These are taxes for specific purposes, right? But apparently they often don't end up where they're supposed to go.
That's right. Our sources highlight this. For instance, in the last fiscal year, FY24, total cess collection was huge, 4.88 lakh crore. But a significant chunk, like the oil cess meant for the Oil Industry Development Fund, often gets diverted. It's used like regular tax revenue, not shared with states as it should be, not necessarily spent on oil industry development.
So it raises concerns about what the constitutional spirit of these things.
Yes, about violating the spirit of earmarking funds and maybe encouraging profligacy instead of targeted, transparent spending.
And then there's the big push for ethanol blending in fuel, particularly E20. On one side, it's seen as a win-saving foreign exchange, cutting emissions.
Definitely. Achieving 20% ethanol blending, E20, 5 years ahead of schedule is significant. Potential savings, over 1.44 trillion in Forex, reduced carbon emissions. Those are big positives.
But there are also transition challenges, as the sources put it.
Yes. For consumers, the transition hasn't been smooth. A lack of choice at the pump, issues with vehicle compatibility, Most car engines in India were calibrated for E10, not E20. That's led to widespread frustration.
Right.
And beyond that, it really sparks the whole food versus fuel debate. It impacts maize prices, raises concerns about water-guzzling crops like rice and sugarcane being diverted for fuel. That could compromise food and water security, which is obviously critical for India.
This tension between different sectors, this farms versus firms debate, it also shows up in the cotton sector, doesn't it?
It does. The sources discuss how removing import duties on cotton might help the textile industry, especially with U.S. tariffs hitting them. But it can really hurt farmers because it pushes down to domestic prices.
And compounding that, India's R&D spending in cotton is apparently among the lowest in the developing world.
Yeah, which makes it even harder for farmers to compete on yield or quality. So these domestic realities, they just paint a really complex picture of competing interests that policymakers have to juggle.
Okay, so that complexity clearly extends beyond domestic policy into foreign policy as well. India navigating what the sources call an unruly world. The approach is described as strategic autonomy and multi-alignment. What does that mean in practice?
Well, a key principle seems to be that India retains its freedom to choose a partner depending on the situation and its own requirements. It's not about rigid alliances. A prime example cited is India continuing to buy Russian oil despite pressure from the US. It showcases a clear prioritization of national interest over aligning strictly with one bloc or another.
So, prioritizing its own needs. This leads to some really intricate relationships, doesn't it? Particularly with, say, China and the US. With China, we hear talk about the dragon and elephant dance together, but the sources are very clear that unresolved border dispute is still the biggest obstacle.
Absolutely. And putting that in a wider context, the India-US relationship, while called a strategic partnership, is facing, according to these sources, significant strain under the current Trump administration. Trade issues, immigration policies.
But there's another layer too, something about the deep state.
Interestingly, yes. The sources mention a deep state within the US think parts of the military-industrial complex having a vested interest in maintaining a good relationship with India. Why? Well, India is the world's biggest arms importer. It shows how economic drivers can subtly underpin geopolitical alignments, sometimes regardless of who's in the White House.
Fascinating. Speaking of economics, let's shift to the future of global currency. There's this whole debate, yuan versus dollar. And maybe, just maybe, a third way for India.
Yeah, this is a really interesting area. A striking point from the sources is China's long game to globalize the yuan, even though its current share in international payments or forex reserves is still quite low.
But how are they doing it?
Beijing is leveraging its massive trade influence, offering yuan-denominated loans, building up its own payment system, CIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system, and of course pushing its digital yuan. They're definitely trying to challenge the dollar's dominance.
But the dollar still has advantages.
Oh, absolutely. The US dollar still holds that distinct advantage of full convertibility, which is a major hurdle for any challenger, including the yuan.
So China has a plan, but the dollar's reign isn't over yet. Where does India fit into this picture? Is there a third option?
Well, the idea being floated, according to our sources, is for India to potentially revive John Maynard Keynes' old concept of a global trade currency. Maybe a digital one, like an e-rupee, that specifically upholds the ideals of democracy and privacy.
So positioning itself differently from, say, China's approach.
Exactly. Potentially offering an alternative to what some might term a surveillance state currency. It could give India an edge, positioning it as a leader in a possibly more democratic digital financial future. It's ambitious, but interesting.
Very interesting. Okay, this next piece offers another compelling angle, technology and national strategy colliding. Our sources highlight Reliance's huge bet on artificial intelligence. Mukesh Ambani famously said, data is the new oil.
And he's putting serious money behind that idea, investing $50 billion in geo-platforms, setting up Reliance Intelligence to create high-value AI products. The goal seems to be refining raw data into premium tech solutions, much like refining crude oil.
How are they gearing up for that?
They're building massive GW-scale data centers, securing top-tier NVIDIA chips, forging partnerships with global tech giants like Google and Meta. It really underscores this national drive, it seems, to cultivate homegrown AI capabilities rather than just importing technology or letting global players dominate, recognizing AI as absolutely core to future economic power.
And alongside that digital frontier, there's a push for physical resources too, specifically critical minerals, essential for green tech, electronics, everything, really.
Absolutely critical. India is moving to secure its own supply chains here. There's a 1,500 crore incentive scheme specifically for recycling e-waste and lithium-ion batteries.
Why the focus on recycling?
Well, India is the world's third largest e-waste generator, but currently recycles only about 15–17% of it. That's a huge missed resource.
Wow, only 15–17%.
Yeah. So the broader point the sources make is that financial incentives alone might not be enough. You might need stronger policy levers, like mandates for using recycled minerals in new products, to really build robust domestic demand and cut reliance on importing virgin materials. It's about national self-sufficiency in a really vital sector.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly now, moving from national strategy more towards societal dynamics. Our sources present a fascinating and maybe somewhat cautionary tale from Nepal involving social media and youth protests. We heard about these apparently organic uprisings against corruption in Kathmandu, led by young protesters, Gen Z, who actually forced the prime minister to resign.
Right, and that leads us to consider the real nature and, importantly, the consequences of movements like that. While the uprising did force PM KP Sharma Oli to resign and led to an interim PM, our sources also present a stark counter-narrative.
Okay, what's the other side?
They describe these protesters as, quote, unwise groups of youth, armed with social media channels and a distorted sense of justice. Apparently, it led to chaos, public humiliation examples like former PMs being stripped and paraded in the streets, and destruction of property.
That sounds pretty grim.
It highlights what one source calls the Gen Z illusion, this belief that sheer moral indignation and digital virality are enough to create political change. But often the result is violence that lacks the strategic foresight for genuine reform. It actually echoes our very first point about the dangers of rapid, unthoughtful reactions just amplified by social media.
That's a powerful and, concerning perspective on how digital tools can just amplify outrage without necessarily leading to constructive, lasting change. Okay, let's bring it back to India now, looking at the contentious issue of online gaming. There was apparently a stealth operation to ban real money games.
Indeed. The Indian government pushed through the Online Gaming Bill 2025, effectively outlawing online real money games. And the way it was done reportedly without much prior consultation with the industry or even the states is causing concern.
What are the expected consequences?
Well, the sources predict serious repercussions for foreign direct investment, significant job losses, and a big sacrifice in potential revenue estimated at around 17,000 crore in goods and services tax alone. Plus, there are questions about whether it violates constitutional provisions like Article 19(1)(g), the right to practice any profession or business.
So the ban seems like a very blunt instrument here. What could have been a more balanced resolution, according to the sources?
The argument put forward is that careful regulation combined with responsible play tools would have been much more effective. Things like mandatory age gating, self-exclusion mechanisms for players who feel they have a problem, robust know your customer, or KYC checks.
So managing the risks rather than just shutting it down.
Exactly, because a ban, instead of solving the problem of compulsive gambling, risks just pushing players towards illegal apps, often hosted offshore. Then you lose all tax revenue, you have no consumer protection, and zero oversight. It looks like a missed opportunity to build strong oversight frameworks that could have fostered responsible growth in the sector.
Okay, finally, let's quickly turn our attention to financial market regulation in India. The sources touch on SEBI's vigilance, that's the regulator, and this ongoing debate about market stability versus, well, maybe hindering growth sometimes.
Right. SEBI, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, has definitely been active, trying to prevent redemption crises, for example, like after the JP Morgan case involving corporate bond investments by asset management companies. They've also relaxed some IPO rules to try and enlarge the funnel of securities and capital.
But then there's this options debate. Talk about banning weekly option contracts because retail investors are losing money.
Yes, that's a concern. But our sources present a pretty strong counter-argument, don't they? They suggest that these derivatives, while risky for some, are actually fundamental to overall market health.
How so?
Well, they argue that financial derivatives are fundamental tools for customizing risk. They actually enhance market liquidity and efficiency. They point to the U.S. market, where these 0DTE, 0 day to expiry options have seen explosive growth on the S&P 500.
Right, I saw those numbers, like 43% of total volumes.
Right.
$1 trillion daily.
Exactly. It demonstrates their value in sophisticated markets, and importantly, it shows they don't necessarily cause systemic instability if managed correctly. So the broader implication here is that policy should probably focus on enabling domestic institutions, improving transparency, educating investors, rather than resorting to outright prohibition. Banning things often just drives activity underground into less transparent, maybe illegal markets. It's about fostering a deeper, more resilient financial ecosystem, not dismantling functioning parts of it.
So after diving deep into all these sources, what does this all mean for you, our listener? Trying to make sense of this increasingly interconnected, often really complex world. We've seen how India is navigating its own challenging path. From drawing on ancient wisdom like Tarkashastra and Ekantwad for disciplined thinking, through ambitious domestic transformations in infrastructure and human capital, navigating the intricate dance of global geopolitics and economic strategy.
In grappling with those urgent societal challenges like digital governance, market regulation, the food fuel debate.
It's clear that whether you're talking about individuals or entire nations, everyone is grappling with this incredible speed of information flow, massive technological shifts, and these profound currents, both domestic and international.
Indeed. And what really stands out, I think, is this persistent need for critical thinking, for embracing multiple perspectives, that strategic humility again, the agility to adapt to new tech, and maybe the courage to craft responsive, nuanced policies rather than just reacting hastily.
Whether you're a national leader or just, an individual trying to make sense of the daily news.
Right. That ability to process complex information, to deliberate thoughtfully, and to act with that strategic humility, it seems more crucial than ever for actually thriving in this global landscape.
Which brings us to a final, maybe provocative thought for you to ponder. In a world where the lines between fact, what actually happened, and truth, the deeper meaning, the context we draw from those facts, can get so easily blurred, and where, as we saw, moral outrage can be weaponized with terrifying speed. How can we, as informed citizens, cultivate that disciplined thinking and strategic humility? How do we build truly resilient, equitable societies? What role will you play in seeking clarity over just adding to the noise?